So, have you ever stopped to wonder why our lives today are just so radically different from, say, our great great grandparents? Or why the economy always seems to be on a roller coaster, swinging from good times to bad? Well, today we're going to build the roadmap that helps us understand all of that. We're going to see how modern economists think about the entire economy, from the massive sweep of history all the way down to the day to day decisions that affect your wallet. This is the big picture. Just take a look at this chart. Seriously. For thousands and thousands of years, the standard of living for the average person barely budged. Life for someone in ancient Rome wasn't all that different, economically speaking, from someone living 1,000 years later in Renaissance Italy. And then, bam, around the 1800s, something just unbelievable happens. This line, which is basically tracking how well off people are, it just goes vertical. This isn't just a little bit of growth, it's an explosion. Understanding this hockey stick shape is ground zero for all of modern macroeconomics. So, for the first leg of our journey, let's imagine we're looking at the economy through a giant telescope. We're zooming way, way out to focus on the most powerful force that has ever shaped our world: long-term economic growth. Now, what's so cool about this is it puts actual numbers on that crazy chart we just saw. Before 1820, the average growth rate per year was, a pretty pathetic 0.15%. But after 1820, it jumps eightfold, and then it just keeps climbing. Now, I know these look like tiny numbers, but when you compound them over decades, that's the difference between a world of stagnation and the world we live in now. It's literally the difference between horse-drawn carriages and rockets to Mars. But here's the catch. This incredible wave of growth didn't hit every country at the same time or in the same way. As you can see here, some countries caught that industrial wave early, and their incomes just took off. Others, well, they were left behind for decades, sometimes even centuries. This created what we now call the Great Divergence, that huge gap in wealth between rich and poor nations that, let's be honest, defines a lot of global politics today. So this brings us to a really important question. If the big overarching story of the last couple centuries is this amazing, powerful upward climb, why doesn't it feel like that all the time? Right? Why do we still have to go through these painful recessions with people losing jobs and businesses failing? And this slide just illustrates that perfectly. On the left, you've got the forest. That's the smooth, long-term growth we've been talking about. But on the right, you see the trees. That's the actual real-world path of the U.S. economy. It's jagged. It's bumpy. And you see all those shaded gray bars? Yeah, every single one of those is a recession. So the long-run story is one of amazing progress, for sure. But the short-run reality is a whole lot messier. Okay, so let's put away the telescope for a minute and grab a magnifying glass. It's time to zoom right in on those jagged lines and try to understand these ups and downs we call the business cycle. Now, this chart, this shows how fast the U.S. economy is growing or shrinking at any given time. And man, you can really see how wild the ride can be. It's not a steady climb at all. The economy swings from these big booms, growing way faster than average, to these sharp busts where it's actually contracting and going backward. This volatility isn't some kind of mistake. It's just a fundamental part of how our economy works. And these swings, they're not just abstract numbers on a chart. This table shows you the real-world pain. Yeah, GDP falls, we know that. But look closer. Employment drops. The number of hours people are working goes down. And business investment, it totally collapses. These are real costs that affect millions and millions of people. So understanding what's driving this is absolutely crucial. Which leads us to the next big mystery. Think about it. In a perfect world, if the government just printed more money, it should just make prices go up, right? It shouldn't really affect how many cars are built or how many people have jobs. So why, in our world, can decisions made by a central bank have such a huge impact on the real economy? To answer that, we've got to zoom in even further. We're swapping the magnifying glass for a microscope. We need to get right down into the gears of the economy to see where the friction is. And here it is, the key idea: nominal rigidities. It sounds super technical, but it's actually a pretty simple concept we all get intuitively. It just means that prices are sticky. They don't change every 5 seconds. The restaurant example is perfect. If the cost of tomatoes goes up a little bit, the owner isn't going to run out and reprint every single menu that day. For a while, that price is stuck. And that little bit of stickiness, that's the grit in the economic machine that changes everything. So here's how that plays out. It's like a chain reaction. Step 1, the central bank pumps more money into the economy. Step 2, because prices are sticky, restaurant menus and price tags can't instantly adjust to soak up all that new cash. So something else has to give. That's step 3. Businesses adjust the things they can change, like how much stuff they make and how many people they hire. And boom, just like that, step 4, a change in the amount of paper money has had a very real effect on jobs and production. So this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. If central banks really can influence the real economy, well, how should they do it? This is where we get into the tricky science and maybe a little bit of art of monetary policy. For a long time, economists thought they had a pretty simple rulebook. It was called the Phillips curve. And looking at the data before 1970, it seemed like a clear trade-off. You can see it here. If you wanted to get unemployment down, you just had to be willing to live with a little more inflation. It looked like a predictable, stable relationship. Policymakers thought they had a menu of options to choose from. And then the 1970s happened, and the whole thing just blew up. That neat, predictable line we just saw, it dissolves into this chaotic mess of dots. All of a sudden, the US was getting hit with stagflation. That's high inflation and high unemployment at the same time, something the old theory said couldn't happen. The simple rulebook was useless. So what on earth went wrong? Well, the answer sparked a revolution in economics, and it's summed up perfectly in this quote from Robert Lucas. His big idea, the Lucas critique, was basically this: people aren't stupid. They're not just passive pieces on a chessboard. They're smart, and they think about the future. If people start expecting the government to create more inflation, they're going to change their behavior now. They'll ask for higher wages, and that breaks the very trade-off the policymakers were trying to use. The rules of the game changed because the players figured out the strategy. And this leads to a profound insight. The most important asset a central bank has isn't its ability to print money, it's credibility. It's our belief, as a public, that they will actually do what they say they're going to do. If that trust disappears, people's expectations can fly all over the place, and suddenly the central bank's policies become useless or even harmful. Managing what we all think will happen in the future, that's not just part of the job, it pretty much is the job. Okay, so let's take one last step back and see how all these pieces, the long-run growth, the short-run cycles, those sticky prices, and the role of expectations, all click together to form the way we think about macroeconomics today. So the economic models that experts use today are built on these 4 big pillars. First, dynamic optimization. That's just a fancy way of saying we all try to plan for the future. Second, general equilibrium. The idea that you can't just tweak one part of the economy without affecting everything else. And of course, the 2 we just talked about, a huge focus on our expectations for the future and the absolute importance of credibility for institutions like the central bank. And that's really been our journey today, hasn't it? We started with the bedrock foundation, long-run growth. Then we zoomed in on the short-run bumps in the road, the business cycles. We popped the hood to look at the sticky frictions that make the engine run rough sometimes. And finally, we looked at the challenge of how you even design policy in such a complicated world. It's a logical trip from the 30,000-foot view down to the nuts and bolts. Which leaves us with this. This right here is the grand, unifying question that drives this entire field of study. How do real things, like technology and factories, interact with nominal things, like the money supply, in an economy where everything is connected and everyone is trying to guess what happens next? Figuring that out is the whole game, and it's exactly what we're going to be digging into throughout this series.